Offshore wind is a market with great potential in the U.S. Although it's at an early stage compared with Europe and elsewhere, key stakeholders continue to signal commitment to ambitious plans and goals, particularly at state and local levels. It's the perfect opportunity to build a system that draws in the best of the more established markets. And it's a chance to apply the weight of our own industry and know-how to our new clean energy infrastructure, driven by a sector that's infused with quality in every aspect. And nowhere will that quality have a greater and more important impact than in the area of worker safety. In this discussion, leading local offshore wind experts explore what we can learn and where we can lead in the area of health and safety. And crucially, how this youthful sector can grow by working together and sharing learnings across all industry players, including developers, regulators, and supply chain partners.
Hi, my name is David LaBelle. I'm the Vice President of Environmental Health and Safety for Avangrid.
My name is Steve Daney. I'm the head of Offshore Wind Business Unit in North America for Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy.
My name is Mary Childs. I'm the EHS leader for global operations for GE Renewables offshore wind sector.
My name is David Yang. I work as the Regional Operations HSE Manager for Ørsted.
The critical success factors for us and many others in this market really are consistency in terms of what the regulatory requirements are, demand for offshore wind, predictable, stable conditions for us to make long-term investments and our customers to make very, very large investments. Scale is also very important to continue driving down the levelized cost of energy, cost to our customers and their ultimate customers.
The collaboration in the U.S. offshore wind market has been phenomenal. So it is currently right now only one operational wind farm, and that has been our Block Island wind farm. And I have to really praise them because what they've done is set a very high bar. They had to be adaptive and they had to be collaborative in learning how to take learnings from the onshore wind applications and a bit of marine environment, and a lot of that learning was brought over from the European teams. And so they did a very good job to adapt and to share what they have learned back to us so that we can grow together better. And when we say that they've done that, they've really done it well. I mean, when you talk about key performance indicators on how to benchmark performance, we can say they have been, since the beginning of their operation, now more than 1,300 days without a recordable injury, no lost time events, no significant accidents. And that is by collaboration. That's how they have taken what they know from other areas and how they've applied it and used that with the basis and the knowledge of what is already existing in GE offshore wind, which has been largely European.
The U.S. offshore wind industry is still kind of a blank slate. We have a couple of projects, and those projects have been successful. We haven't seen a lot of projects yet with steel in the water, but of course that is our goal. We want to make sure that health and safety is applied, and we have a lot of lessons that we can take from the U.S. offshore oil and gas sector, as well as the offshore wind industry in Europe. We're obviously trying to ensure that health and safety is infused within the offshore wind industry to make sure that everyone who takes part in an offshore wind project is as safe as possible. So I do think, even though it's a bit unclear where we currently sit as far as the maturity for health and safety, we obviously do have a common goal in making sure that everyone is safe. And the leading developers in that goal do have a very strong health and safety maturity.
While the risks here are not completely new to us as a whole, they are new to many that are working in the offshore industry. Taking the learnings from others, both in the offshore wind global community and other like businesses, is critical. While we talk a lot in the U.S. about focusing on significant incidents or injuries and fatalities, or SIFs as we like to call them, we're just now starting to get better at measuring precursors to those injuries, but we're learning that serious injuries and fatalities can exist in normal work. Some of those risks, in my mind, include things like helicopter operations, vessel collisions, work at heights, offshore transfers, confined space, diving work, heavy lifting, and of course, electrical risk. Doing all this at sea, subject to the harsh environmental conditions, makes it all that much more challenging.
Areas in which the U.S. can take a leadership role in the offshore industry really is driven by the unique characteristics of the U.S. market and frankly the constraints that the U.S. market has compared to the global market. The types of things that come to mind are in the U.S. as a result of what's known as the Jones Act, which regulates the type of transport and construction vessels that can be used to ferry people and goods between U.S. ports. We will have to adopt a different type of installation program and setup in the U.S. compared to elsewhere because there are not yet Jones Act compliant installation vessels that similar to the ones that are used elsewhere globally to construct projects. So it's our view that the U.S. will take a leadership role in these innovative, new, different types of installation programs, how they're conducted, the steps, the procedures that are used, the health and safety requirements that are necessary. We will take a role in creating these types of alternative installation programs. In addition, there is a keen focus on driving down the levelized cost of energy in the U.S. market. And the U.S. is known for being very innovative and creative. And I expect that we will continue as an industry. Many different industry participants will look at ways to drive down the overall levelized cost of energy, whether it's through alternative installation programs, design innovations, the way we conduct our operations. The innovation will help drive down costs to the industry as a whole.
I've had the benefit of working for several global companies, and there are some distinct differences between the U.S. and European approach. The first I'd highlight is the focus on a risk-based approach rather than a compliance approach. And what do I mean by that? In a compliance approach, companies might tend to focus on the regulation, but miss the broader perspective and perhaps invest time and effort in the wrong place. Specifically, understanding the work from a risk-based approach helps identify some potential error traps and helps us build systems that allow us to fail safely. I do think the U.S. in some ways is leading the way when it comes to understanding human and organizational performance around safety, building a culture built on trust, understanding that as humans we're all fallible, and that we need to be willing to accept that, and that workers come to work essentially to do a good job. Our response to failure as leaders matters and defines our ability to learn from it.
There's a number of tools, activities, and methods that can facilitate collaboration for us in the U.S. Some of these include sharing best practices. So having the methodology used from a different region and applying that as a baseline. Obviously, that can be tweaked as needed here in the U.S., but as a baseline that can identify hazards and employ best practices so it minimizes the risk to workers. We have potentially a chance to align health and safety metrics. So we're measuring apples to apples and not apples to oranges. So being able to understand what that is from one region to another would be highly beneficial. And also even comparing things like risk assessment data. We know what the hazards are. There is, of course, hazards here in the US that apply only to the US. And there's certainly other risks which we're not perhaps even aware of. These can be quite beneficial, especially as an emerging market. Getting these practices in place before we get too matured ensures that we start off from the right footing in the right time.
Having been an American working in Europe for quite some time and now working with G+, I've had the benefit of meeting some very interesting people and some positive collaborators in the health and safety market, because there's certainly a variance in both areas where there's regulatory complexity and the application of health and safety management. But health and safety management from that regulatory compliance standard, that's a topic for EHS professionals. How you apply that health and safety mentality and bring about that positive behavioral-based safety culture is really about how we understand that and take our best practices and apply them to the field working teams. Because without that positive team dynamic and the learnings that are really focused toward how the teams in the field will use them, then it's paperwork. It's a compliance exercise. And we're not interested in a compliance exercise or a commercial exercise. What we're really interested in, and where the heart of this grows in a positive way, is to give the opportunity for that maturity to flourish by bringing the best practices, by bringing the learnings from the Safe by Design workshops and the G plus sharing of incidents. So we have come together, and as safety professionals, we've decided safety is not proprietary.
G+, the Global Offshore Wind Health and Safety Organization. We work in close collaboration with partners from offshore wind and adjacent industries, such as marine, construction, and oil and gas, to drive the global health and safety agenda through our work program. A work program that recognizes the differences in markets around the world. We start with incident data reporting, collated, analyzed, and published to monitor performance and trends and identify risks. We share learnings from real-life incidents, hazards, and safety-critical tasks with the wider offshore wind industry. Then we turn the data into action. Our Safe by Design workshops help identify opportunities for improvement and demonstrate the potential for risk reduction at the design stage. Our good practice guidelines focus on areas of high risk. By drawing knowledge and expertise from members, subject matter experts, academia, regulators, and industry stakeholders, we can put together robust guidance for the industry for the purpose of sharing knowledge and experience and bringing about consensus within the industry. The G+ Work Program, working with international networks, supporting industry bodies, policymakers, and supply chains, creating world-class health and safety information.
From a safety perspective, there is a fair amount of information and knowledge that can be pulled from the other markets. One of the key things that we can use and basically build a foundation for health and safety management is knowledge of the risks, as well as the control mitigations used to control that risk that is applied to ensure worker safety. From development to construction to operation, all of these risks, which are well known in other markets, are not well known here in the US. So we can understand what those risks are and be able to prioritize efforts and time and research so that those key risks, which are most applicable to us in the US, are managed at a higher degree.
Key areas that the US offshore wind industry can learn from others on. Let's start with health and safety practices that have been adopted by others that have been in this business for decades. I think it would be short-sighted if the US didn't at least look at what those health and safety practices are, assess how they're applicable to the United States and to our regulatory regime, and adopt those best practices for our use in the US to minimize risk to our employees and overall risk to the industry as a whole. There's lots of other areas that we are looking at in the US and learning from others, whether it's electrical safety standards, turbine design, substations, cables, all the other balance of plant. We're learning from what's been done over the last 30 plus years in Europe in the offshore wind industry.
U.S. sector is very open and collaborative. In fact, I'd say we're hungry for knowledge from our partners and other stakeholders. We're keen to learn the lessons from Europe in order to try to minimize incidents in other areas of the world.
I think the biggest difference between the way health and safety is managed in the U.S. versus Europe is that we have a different regulatory responsibilities and a different split between different areas of the overall industry with different regulatory bodies versus the regulatory agency that may have responsibility in Europe. So that really needs to be addressed. We need to understand who's responsible for what in the United States. And let me give you a couple of examples. Safety on vessels is the responsibility of the United States Coast Guard. Safety for structures under the waterline has traditionally been developed by the American Petroleum Institute. And safety for what's above the waterline has been developed through other standards development entities, such as AWEA or ANSI, or even the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and its enforcement counterpart, BSEE. So there are different regulatory splits in the US compared to Europe and elsewhere. So we need to understand what those are. We can still learn from them, but those responsibilities are different. In general, I would say that the US industry prefers performance-based standards to prescriptive standards. That's always our preference.
We shouldn't be competing here when it comes to worker safety. We want to leverage existing health and safety assets by using materials that are tailored to suit the U.S. market, adapting to the U.S. health and safety culture, and raising awareness across the industry. There are many existing efforts that I think we can leverage from G+. They include incident data, which helps us see where hotspots have been in other jurisdictions and to anticipate these for the U.S. projects, good practice guidelines to help learn lessons from other jurisdictions. I'd also highlight safety by design, a good way to foster industry collaboration and to ensure health and safety is embedded from the outset of projects. And I think last is regular engagement, a good way to allow the U.S. players to stay up to date on industry updates, emerging issues, and so forth.
There are differences in the overall approach that the US and Europe have when it comes to managing health and safety. But I think these differences are a bit overstated. We do have a priority in ensuring worker safety, and a lot of the effort that we have in the US is a bit more regulatory based, where onshore activities have a very robust set of regulations which manage occupational health and safety. And what BSEE has been trying to apply in the offshore market is something which is a bit more performance-based, where they want to see a robust culture that identifies near misses as well as minor injuries, which, as you control or mitigate and prevent, you'll see less and less more severe injuries, and hopefully less and less fatalities. So this performance-based standard is still fairly new to the East Coast, where this is something that they're familiar with in the Gulf of Mexico for offshore oil and gas. But this is something which is becoming what we hope to be a normal perspective.
We have a unique opportunity here to help shape the regulatory landscape in a way that provides maximum protection for our workers by learning from our partners.
The U.S. will leverage what it can learn from global participants in the existing offshore wind industry, as well as from our own offshore oil and gas industry, which has a long history here in the U.S. In fact, we're seeing oil and gas majors that have a presence in the US and globally get into the offshore wind market. And in many cases, they're taking and bringing people directly from their offshore oil and gas business into the offshore wind business.
Some of the benefits that we get from industry practices, some of the benefits we get from adjacent industries or industries for offshore wind in other regions can, of course, be applied to the U.S. So the U.S., I firmly believe, will be able to take and be collaborative with other regions and share knowledge.
There's some great experience in the oil and gas industry to leverage in addition to some strong maritime experience. It's really important that we're open to learning from others who have experience in offshore to ensure that safety is integral to everything we do.
Some of the ways that we can help this collaboration and foster participation across multiple markets and learn from each other. I like to repeat something that one of my favorite managers would often say, which is communicate, communicate, communicate.
One of our best engagement opportunities is the Stakeholder Day. And through the Stakeholder Day, we get the chance to bring in not just safety professionals, because we know safety and we agree safety is not proprietary, and we share our learnings, but we get the opportunity to bring in our executive heads. We get to bring in our operational leadership, our engineering leadership, our construction leadership, show them what we're doing. And we get the opportunity to invite also our contractors, our vessel providers, and our regulators, because they're not someone that we want to work around. They're someone we want to bring in, let them know what we're doing, how we're improving, and show them how we're moving the industry forward. And that is one of the most beneficial experiences I've had the opportunity to be a part of yet.
By harmonizing the experience and best practice from other regions with our unique strengths from across the U.S., we're building a safe, sustainable industry that will support local communities with clean, affordable energy. And by collaborating, learning, and sharing with an expert global network, we can build it right the first time.
The occupational health and wellbeing aspect from a personnel perspective is huge. We're going into new sectors, further offshore, different operating regimes, and right now we don't really understand the potential impact on those individuals. So it's key that we analyse that information right now, and we have a clear solution going forward which will assist the industry as it grows in the international space.
I think G+ has achieved fantastic results. It's really established itself as the group and the forum to be in. I think we can do even more. I think we can not only be a partner to the companies and the actors in the industry, but also towards the authorities.
The Crown Estate recognise the Crown Estate is passionate about health and safety, and we recognise actually that a lot of that data is really rich data for us to understand and make sure that the industry is progressing and improving its health and safety performance.
If we make mistakes around health and safety, if we have accidents, if we don't treat people right, government's going to see this. It's going to really damage our ability to grow. It's going to damage our reputation. It's going to damage policymakers' appetite to allow us to go as fast and as big as we need to go. So it's absolutely essential that we get these things right, both from a human point of view and from a kind of economic point of view.
The great thing about G+ is that it's established. It's already had a number of years of practicing in Europe. It has a clear mission. It has a clear remit to improve safety in the offshore market. So it's moving from a position of strength and experience into what is now a global market in offshore wind.
Let's say a market like the U.S., they are very experienced already and have their own modus operandi when it comes to both onshore and offshore works. And of course, for us, the standardization journey over there is much more around collaborating, engaging with the existing organization, and again, bringing sort of the wind industry up to one standardized flight level.
I think there's a lot of really useful things that have come out of the G+, and you can look at some individual things like the fact that it's now become a reliable source of all health and safety incident data for the whole offshore wind industry, which is really important to help you to identify where the risk areas are and where you need to take action. What the G+ is doing is it's bringing the right people together, creating an environment, a safe environment to share information, good and bad, share experiences, good and bad, share best practice and help each other to improve health and safety.
If you have questions that this video didn't answer, please reach out to us by email. You can also find out more by visiting our website. From there, you can learn about our goals, meet our board, and download a wealth of expert resources for free. G+, the Global Offshore Wind Health and Safety Organization, because we all own health and safety.